The OTB recap series continues. We are now in the month of November, and 2 weeks after the Eastern Chess Congress, I decided to make my return to a place called the Westfield Chess Club. Now, the Westfield Chess Club is a club in Westfield, New Jersey, and I played there basically from the time I was a total beginner up until the pandemic. During college, it was almost exclusively where I played, and I gained about 150 rating points over just a couple tournaments in like the period of 2017 to 2019. It used to be mostly a quad tournament. Like almost every weekend they would have quads, which is when you're grouped into a group of 4 players, all close together in rating. But since reopening after the pandemic, they transitioned more into having Swiss tournaments. And at this point, the tournaments were 3 rounds. And the time control is now game 40, delay 5. They used to have a little bit longer time control, but now it's game 40, delay 5, which is part of the reason why I was very reluctant to play in one of these tournaments, because I'm not really a fan of like sort of the action time control, where it's almost like a hybrid between rapid and classical. But you know, I decided I was going to try it out. I'm hoping to cross 2100 again. So the first round I played against a 1700 and won pretty smoothly, but now in round 2 I'm already up against a 2000, so somewhat already much closer to my level. And this is another kid. Funny enough, the last game that I featured was against a kid. And this is also a kid with the same exact USCF rating and also about 10 or 11 years old, so it's going to be a tough game. And it's actually the same opening, but he plays this early a4, which I thought was interesting. Excuse me. I play c6, and the funny thing about this kid is that he tends to play quite slowly in the opening for whatever reason. Like this rookie 1 move, he spent like 6 minutes to play, and my strategy was I'm just going to play quickly and try to maybe throw him off a bit, gain an advantage on the clock. This is actually why I played queen c7 instead of castling right away, because I was sort of trying to see what he would do, maybe go for something a little bit different than what I usually play. And I played h6 here, which in some cases, like if white plays h3, black can even go for this knight f8 and potentially even g5 to sort of attack on the king side. He played a5 here after spending 10 minutes. 10 minutes he spent in a 40-minute game on this move. I decided just to play things pretty safe with castles, and he spent another couple minutes and played knight h4. He's already down to less than half of the amount of time compared to what he started with, and I have about 37 minutes still. And when he plays this knight h4 move, clearly he's eyeing up the f5 square. But as soon as white plays this, usually there is some kind of counterstrike in the center which black can go for, because the d4 pawn is now not as stable, and I decided to take. He took, and I played knight to e5, now hitting his bishop, opening up my own bishop. He decides to backtrack, and here I sort of chose the wrong plan. I decided to play this knight g4 move, which looked really tempting because I hit his knight. He basically has to go to f5, because if he goes back to f3, I'm just going to take and double his pawns. So he has to go to f5, and my plan was to trade for his knight, giving him doubled f-pawns. Maybe at some point I play d5, but in the meantime, I have this move bishop h4. What I actually didn't realize, though, is that instead of knight to g4, simple move c5 was actually quite effective here, because I get a tempo on his queen, and then I can play c4 and basically shut out his light square bishop. And this would have been a lot simpler way to go. But I went knight g4, and then bishop h4, but he simply defends with knight e4, and I go d5, kicking his knight back. He goes to g3. Obviously, he needs to keep the f2 pawn under control. And here is where I made sort of an innocuous mistake. I played the move rook to e8, which looks very natural. I'm defending the knight, activating the rook, actually threatening knight f3 check, followed by rook takes e1, right, discovered attack. But he simply plays the move bishop f4, and it becomes clear to me that the knight is pinned, and this knight is kind of stuck out here. What I actually, again, could have done is just play the move c5. Actually sacrifice the d5 pawn, but I get a lot of compensation. I can bring the rook to the d file. I can now play rook e8. And now bishop f4 actually doesn't work because I have rook d4. And it's basically a skewer. If he takes the knight here, I can take his queen. And now he actually can't take my queen because his rook then hangs. So this would have been a whole lot better than what I did. But now I have to try to figure a way out. Like if I go back with bishop f6, I realized he can just play queen to d1. And he's actually just threatening to take on g4 because of the pin. And if I move the queen, for example, then he can maybe play h3. The knight has nowhere to go. Now, what I could have done here is maybe sacked on f2 and basically given up 2 pieces to get the bishop. I can take on b2. Maybe I have some compensation because I have a strong center and his bishop is not that good, but is it enough for a piece? Probably not. So I ended up playing bishop g5. But again, what I missed is that I was hoping that he would take the bishop and I'd take with the pawn, but he takes the knight and he plays f4. And my bishop and knight are forked. It looks like I'm just losing a piece. I hit him with c5, hoping that he takes on d5, then I take on f4, but he just goes back to d2, of course. And basically I have to give up a piece. I mean, in the meantime, though, I have some counterplay because I play c4, but he goes bishop a4, hitting the rook. I hit him with a check, and at this point, I have about 15 minutes, and he has less than 10, so I'm trying to keep him under some pressure, trying to keep a time edge. I go knight g4, obviously with some knight f2 ideas in mind, but he very cleverly, he doesn't take the bishop because that would land him in some trouble. I have check, I have this check, he has to go back to h1, and actually I can basically force a draw here, because if he ever goes to f1, he gets mated. But he cleverly took the rook, and then played rook to f1, because he knows that my rook is hanging, my bishop is hanging, he can't save both. Right? If he had gotten greedy and taken this, then again, I can actually win his queen here with this little maneuver. So he plays the move rook f1, and that's it. I've reached the end of the line. I'm losing a piece here. But of course, I'm not about to give up. I'm about to go for some counterplay. I go rook e3. He, of course, takes the bishop. I take back. And even though I'm down a piece here, I do have a pawn in return. And his bishop is sort of locked out of the game. And I have some kind of subtle pressure against his kingside. I have ideas like, at some moment, maybe I could, for example, sacrifice the rook against the knight and try to sneak the queen in somehow, or maybe bring the queen to d6 and sacrifice that way. You know, there's these tactics that he has to be kind of aware of. Now, what he needed to play here was the move c3, kind of stabilizing the center, not allowing me to push d4, looking to bring his bishop back to c2. And if I go queen d6, he can just play rook f3, and I'm not in time to sacrifice the rook or anything. He would definitely be better in this case. But he played the move b4, attacking the queen, but the problem is that I want to go to d6 anyway, and he hasn't helped himself get his bishop into the game. And now he plays the move rook to e1, kind of natural move, looking to trade rooks, but this move creates just enough of an opportunity for me to kind of muddy the waters here. You can take a moment to think about what you would play here as black. It's tempting to sacrifice on g3, but the problem is that he goes king to g1, and or actually he can even throw in this check first, but regardless, his king manages to escape here, and he can block with the queen. And maybe I have a check, but then his king gets to d2. It's really murky. But the key move here, which I found, is the move c3. And by the way, he's already down to like 3 minutes, and all of a sudden he realizes that his queen's under attack, he can't go to d1 because he loses the queen, but if he goes to c1, now I actually can sack because his queen no longer defends the second rank, meaning that I have at the very least a draw here. I can just basically create a perpetual. And I have to, because if I try to go for more, like with queen h2, again, his king is going to get away. And, I can give a check, but he can even go to d4. And actually, his king miraculously escapes the checks. So, realizing that if he goes to c1, it's a draw, where he might have even been scared that he would lose, he decided to part ways with the queen, give it up for the rook and the knight. And, mathematically speaking, it seems like he's better because he has rook, knight, and bishop, but I collect now another pawn, and suddenly it's queen and a couple of extra pawns against his rook, knight, and bishop. And again, I have a pawn in the center, his bishop is not that active, so the tables have definitely turned by this point. He has less than 2 minutes, and I have maybe 6 minutes or so at this point still. He plays h3, giving his king some luft. I swing the queen back to c5. He moves the rook to try to get the d5 pawn, but I go queen d6, and he cannot take now on d5 with the rook because then his knight hangs. So he gives a check. I put the king on h7. He played king h2 here, which to me looked wrong, that he would kind of self-pin when he could have maybe played knight e2. But he goes king h2. And at this point, I was thinking, okay, how do I make progress here? Well, I have these extra pawns on the queen side, so I'm going to have to try to push them. But not so fast. He goes rook a8, and now I can't play a5 because he has it under control, so I go a6. He goes rook a7, hitting the f7 pawn. I push f6. Trying to keep everything stable, not allow any kind of counterplay. He plays rook a8, and it was a little bit tricky here to figure out how to make progress, because I can't push any of the pawns, really. Like, if I play d4, I'm allowing his bishop in, and now I'm probably losing. So I spent a couple of my minutes. I had only 6 minutes left. I went down to like 3 or 4, and I played g6, because I figured I needed to somehow open a pathway to make progress. Of course, I have to be careful because I allowed a check, but if he doesn't take my pawn, I'm going to take his, because his knight can never recapture an f5 because it's pinned. So he takes, I take back, and he goes rook a8. He's obviously looking to, again, make some checks, but in the meantime, I go f5. He goes check, king h6. He brings the rook back to e8. I go king g7. I have to make sure not to play f4 here. Would be a big blunder because now the knight's no longer pinned and I would lose. But I play king g7, and he brings the rook back to e3, trying to pick off this pawn on c3. And if I play b4, the problem is that now his king can get out of the pin, right, because his knight is protected. And I think I was scared of some forks here. Maybe he can also go rook d3, actually, and attack the d5 pawn. So I play king g6. And actually, this is the moment where my notation ends. Because when you're playing a game with 5-second delay, the rule is actually that when you go under 5 minutes, actually when either player goes under 5 minutes, you're allowed to stop notating. So I kept notating until I was at about 2 minutes, and then I stopped. And this is move 43. The game goes on for another 25 moves, so these next 25 moves are purely from memory. Now, I think I recreated them pretty accurately, but at the end, it gets a little bit fuzzy. He took the pawn now, but now I'm like full steam ahead. I gotta push. Doesn't matter if I give up a pawn or two, but if I can create a pass pawn, that's going to decide the game. He goes rook d3, hitting the pawn on d5. Obviously, I'm not going to let him take it. And here we go, a4. b4. By this point, we're both probably close to a minute, maybe less, playing off the delay, and so it's full-on time scramble. At this moment, though, I realized, so my d4 pawn looks like it's about to fall, but I spotted a very nice move here to try to create a pass pawn, and that is the move b3. Very important move, because looks like I'm sacrificing a pawn, but I'm actually clearing the space for my queen to enter. And once it does, how does he save his bishop? If he played bishop to b1, I have this move queen b2, forking his knight and his bishop. He's losing a piece. If he had played rook to d2, here there's this very nice move d3, where, again, if he takes the pawn, I take his bishop. If he moves the knight away, I have this fork. I pick up the rook, and if he does this, I take the knight. Now, this position would have actually still been complicated because he has a rook and a bishop. Maybe he can make a fortress. But according to the engine, actually g4 and black is winning because I'm able to get my pawn eventually to, or I guess if he had moved his king back, I get the pawn to g3 and it's winning because I just have too many mate threats. If he goes here, then eventually I can actually win the bishop because if he moves it, he's actually getting checkmated. It's really funny, but there's this checkmate. So I would be able to win the bishop, and this is theoretically winning because eventually, I'm going to pick off this a4 pawn, and I'm just going to like force his king into the corner and eventually win this endgame, which I mean in practice would be hard to do, but you know, according to the computer, it can be done. In the game, though, in this position, he like realized that he's in trouble. He saw his bishop under attack. He kind of panicked and he took on d4. I take his bishop now, though, and again, he realizes that he cannot even recapture the pawn because I have check, and I fork him, I just win his rook. So he goes rook f3, but that blunders another fork. It blunders queen a1, and I pick up the knight. And yeah, by this point, like I was definitely down to 30 seconds or less, and we have this position, queen against rook, with a couple pawns still on the board. He's obviously going to try to hold down the fortress, but I slowly improved, got my king in. Again, these moves are probably not 100% accurate, but what I remember happening was I brought my king closer, and at some point I realized that the way that I break his blockade is actually by offering a trade. I have to sacrifice the queen. But the point is that if he takes, I actually take with the pawn, and now I have a pass pawn, and he is not in time to stop it. So once he realized that he can't take the queen, he went back, but then I slowly entered with the king, and I remember the final position being something like this. Like he went to defend his rook, and I gave a check, and he's losing the rook. He has to resign. So yeah, very tense game, but I got the win. I mean, despite the fact that I was down a piece for a couple moves there, managed to create enough complications. I mean, obviously he did not do a good job of managing his time. If he had, he probably would have won the game, but yeah, I won this one, so I started off 2 out of 2. The third round, I played another kid who was rated around like maybe 2050 or so, mid-2000s, and I was white, but I kind of messed up a little bit in the opening, and we were both getting kind of low in the time, so he offered me a draw. I accepted. It was, I mean, more or less equal position. I might have been slightly better, but I was a bit tired already, so I took the draw, finishing on 2.5 out of 3, which unfortunately was not enough to win the tournament. Someone managed to get 3 out of 3, but it was enough to get back over 2100 again, which was a nice boost. And so my next tournament will be the National Chess Congress 2 weeks after this one, and I'll be out with the recap for that pretty soon.